The Bride Who Waits. Chapter 9. The next morning Mira found Isabel at the breakfast table, looking the worse for the wear after her long night out. "You missed a great party," stated the woman, followed by a slow groan. "Why are the lights so bright in here?" Before breakfast was served, the princess headman greeted the women, then said in a lamentable tone, "It has come to our attention that some of the women snuck out last night to attend a party across the border." Mira felt instantly sick, as she knew what was coming next. Her mother would never allow her back into the house. "The prince wants me to advise you that from now on, no border hopping will be allowed. Things between us and Beth and Tash aren't the best right now, and it'll be safer for you to remain within the castle grounds. Otherwise, we cannot guarantee your safety." "What kind of statement is that?" called one woman. "Are you threatening us?" "I assure you I am not. The prince just wants to make sure you are safe, and that you do not get caught up in anything that could end up hurting yourself or others." "That, and he probably wants to make sure that no spies sneak in," whispered one woman to another. "I hear there have been some attempts on his life." "Really?" inquired the other woman. "Yes, they've beefed up security since we came in. Some of the girls that went out last night didn't come back in, because the border patrol wouldn't let them past. I was wondering where they were this morning." "I guess I'm lucky I got a ride in with the Beth and Tash carriage drivers," whispered Isabel with a grin that made Mary think she'd used her special knowledge to gain the ride. "Now we are trapped here?" inquired another woman. "You are not," replied Nehemiah. "It's just if you leave, we cannot guarantee that the border patrol will let you back in." "This is ridiculous," stated one woman as she rose from the table. "I will not be a prisoner of a control-freak prince. I don't care how nice his house is." Turning, she walked out of the room, leaving behind other women who looked to be feeling the same way. "If any of you do not like the idea of remaining on the castle grounds, and wish to return, you may do so. We have carriages waiting for those who want to go home that will drive you back across the border. But once you leave, you cannot come back." "I thought you said we weren't trapped here." The man looked to the woman who had made the statement. "I did. But if you leave in the carriage, you are indicating that you forfeit your want to remain here, and thus cannot come back in order to have a chance at being chosen by the prince." "This is ridiculous," said another woman. "We haven't even seen this prince once, and already he's making all these rules for us. No meat, no alcohol, and now we can't go back across the border. I'm done with this." Other women were done as well and left with her. The man at the front of the room looked sad to see them go, but turned back to the rest with a welcoming smile. "After breakfast, the prince would like to invite you to an after-breakfast ball for dancing and orchestral music. He hopes you will join him." With that, the man bowed his head and left the room as breakfast was served. "Why doesn't the prince eat meat? I could really go for something super greasy," moaned Isabel. "My head feels like a set of drums." Mina looked away from the woman, letting her eyes wander down the length of the table. She spotted Joshua waiting on one of the women she recognized as Rachel. The picky woman seemed to be complaining to him about whatever she was upset about. When she had finished with Joshua, he turned to go, spotting Mira, who waved at him. Making his way around the table, he smiled as he inquired, "Did you need something, miss?" She smiled as she held up a sliced apple. "Yes, this apple is a little too fruity for me. Would you please take it back to the chef and see if he can't do something about that?" His bright smile made her own smile brighter as he laughed at her joke. Then, becoming serious, he took the apple as he nodded. "Yes, ma'am, right away." Then, turning away, he made as if to leave, then turned back around as he placed the apple back on her plate. "Here you are. I hope it is to your liking." Biting into the slice, she nodded. "Yes, much better. I can really tell it's less fruity than the one before. It has more of a vegetable texture to it now." As he watched her eat, he became curious as he asked, "Do you really not mind not being able to have meat with your meals?" "I do," interjected Isabel, who had looked to have passed out on the table. For her own reply, Mira shook her head as she said, "I've never really had that many opportunities to eat meat, so I don't really see what the big deal is not having it. That, and there's so many more kinds of vegetables and fruits." Reaching to a bowl of fruit, she pulled one out as she said, "I mean, what is this? I've never seen anything like it. Is it even a food?" She turned as Isabel placed her hand on top of hers. "Are you serious? You've never had meat before?" Mira started to object that she in fact had, but Isabel was not listening as she lamented, "Oh, my poor deprived child. I can't believe I never noticed it before." Reaching her hand up to Mira's face, she lamented how pale and gaunt she was. Turning to a nearby waiter, she grabbed onto him as she said, "You, give me some meat for this lady. Can't you see she's wasting away?" Without waiting to see if the man would respond to her request, she let her head drop back onto her arm as she went back into a drunken slumber. Turning back to Joshua, he looked to be smiling with affection at Isabel, as he then turned his attention back to Mira and asked, "Do you want to come out before the ball and check out the grapes with me? A new batch just finished ripening." "Really? I'd love that. Can we go into the hedge maze too?" He smiled as he nodded. "I'll see you after breakfast." When he was gone, Isabel snorted awake as she looked around with confusion. "Wait, who's throwing a maze party?" "No one. Go back to sleep." The woman obliged as she passed out again. Chapter 10. The garden looked even more amazing in the light of the morning. The grapes even seemed to sparkle in the sunlight, as Joshua led her over to the new batch of grapes. With a proud smile, he detached a bunch and handed them to her. "What do you think?" Putting some in her mouth, she bit down, instantly feeling like she could go on eating nothing but these grapes and be satisfied forever. "They're wonderful." "You really think so?" She nodded. "I'm glad you like them. They're actually my own design." She looked at him with wonderment as she said, "You bred them yourself?" He nodded. Knowing how hard it was to breed your own crop, she found herself in more awe of him. "That's amazing." He looked slightly bashful, a fact which she thought made him look adorable, as he said, "I haven't really come up with a name for them yet. Do you have any ideas?" Without stopping to think about where she'd heard the name, she replied, "Hepzibah, because they are so delightful." In that moment, his glowing countenance became cloudy as he looked away. "Where have you heard that name?" It took her a long moment to remember. Then, with confusion at his reaction, she said, "It's one of the names in the Forsaken Queen fairy tale. I guess it's not the best story to get a name from, but I think the sentiment it had originally was beautiful." She got a faraway look as she thought back to a long time ago. "I always dreamed when I was a little girl that a prince on a white steed would come to take me to live with him and give me a new name." "Like in the story?" "Yes, but at least I hope I wouldn't, being grateful like she was. I never understood why she treated him that way after all he'd done for her." "No one understands it, but it happened." "I know, and it is a fairy tale. They don't always make sense." He studied her for a moment, as if considering something, then decided to go with his thought, as he told her, "No, I mean the story did happen." "I don't understand." "It became a fairy tale, but there actually was a woman who was rescued by a man, who lavished all he had on her, only to have her betray him in the end." "And the baby?" He nodded. "That happened as well." "That's terrible. I always thought it was just one of those sick fairy tales they told kids to make sure they behaved." He shook his head. "No, it really occurred. In fact, the real story is even more sad than the fairy tale version." His statement bewildered, as she had thought the fairy tale was already bad enough. But worse? She did not even know how that could be. Sensing that things had taken a dark turn, and wanting to turn them around, she motioned to the maze as she asked, "Did you still want to show me the maze?" Though still looking sad, he nodded as he headed in ahead of her. Following along, they walked in silence for a moment, till Mira spotted a horse made out of shrubbery. "Wow, how did they do that?" "It takes a lot of skill and practice." She looked back at him, suddenly suspicious as she asked, "You didn't do this, did you?" He laughed at the look she was giving him as he shook his head. "No, one of the gardeners did. But I did do that one." He pointed to another shrub animal up ahead. Stepping closer, she found it to be a lion that looked to be gazing ahead, as if pondering over a great problem he had yet to solve. "It's amazing, so much detail. It must have taken you forever to learn to do it." "It's not so hard when you have a good teacher. Would you like me to teach you?" She laughed as she shook her head. "Oh no, this seems like one of those things where you have to be good with your hands. I'm not the artistic type. I can barely darn a sock, let alone do whatever this is called." "You never know until you try." She shook her head. "No, I have tried. My mother worked for years with me trying to teach me how to be a useful housewife. But in the end, the only thing I was good for was hard labor." She paused as she thought over the agitation she had caused her mother, as the woman had tried to teach her how to sew or knit or anything useful an actual female should know how to do. Realizing that she let slip about her simple past, she asked Joshua, "Please don't tell anyone else how I'm not a lady. I'm probably the only one left from South Beth Natash, and I don't want the other women to talk me down to the prince." He smiled, putting her at ease as he said, "You don't need to worry about that. The prince never listens to idle gossip. He likes to get to know people for himself." At the mention of the prince, she realized for the first time that there was a question that had not yet been answered. Why haven't any of us ever seen the prince? Before he could reply, a servant came through the maze, calling for the start of the ball to be in 5 minutes. "Oh, I better get going. I'll talk to you later." Hurrying away, she made it back to her room, where she quickly removed her dress and pulled another one out of her bag, not even stopping to wonder how another one could have possibly fit in such a small bag. Once ready, she hurried down the stairs, where she joined the rest of the women in the ballroom, which had been set up with a 12-string orchestra and brass section. "They call this a party?" Isabel had materialized behind her again with a tall glass of orange juice, which she was holding to her head to relieve her throbbing headache. Though nothing like the party they had gone to the previous night, Mira found the more subdued atmosphere and light music to be more pleasing to her tastes. Isabel did not seem to agree with her sentiment, as it was apparent her tastes were tuned more to the wild things of life. As her friend moved away to find a chair to sleep it off, the music started up, and when Mira turned to look at her dance partner, she wished she had gone as well. The man before her was one of the Beth Natasha stagehands, and not just that, but one of the men Isabel had tried to set her up with. Same as the previous night, he was giving her a look that made her feel like running, but as he moved in to take her hands in the dance, she found herself unable to run. The man took her hands and tried to lead her around the room, and though she had taken a few dance classes with Lady Abigail, she found herself unable to recall any of the things she'd been taught. Within the first move of the dance, she stepped on her partner's feet a dozen times. Lucky for him, the dance was one where partners were constantly being changed, as he stepped aside allowing the next man to come in. Taking his hand, she now found herself taking the lead, as they both struggled to take the other around the dance floor. "I step first," admonished the man with impatience. "Why don't you just let me lead? I think I do better this way." "I'm not taking the subservient role." "Same to you, buddy." They were broken apart then as the next group of partners moved over. More problems ensued for her, as before the dance was over, the men were skipping over her so that she ended up standing in place, like a complete idiot, while the rest of the people danced around her. As the sounds of the next song started to play, she decided to leave the floor, feeling a hand take hers just before she could go. Turning back, she was delighted to see Joshua's smiling face. "Leaving so soon?" "I'm not really the best dancer." "I am. I'll help you." He pulled her in, instructing her where to place her hands and then feet. "I don't really like to follow." "Why not? When you trust the one that's leading, it can be a relief to follow." His words made her smile as the song started, and they began to move across the floor. Right off she stepped on his foot, but he kept going, instructing her on what to do next as her steps became surer. As she became more confident, she found herself trying to lead again. Instead of fighting back, he let her go, letting her direct as they crashed into another pair of dancers, then back around the room, where she broke away from him when they almost collided with the waiter carrying a tray of hot beverages. Stepping back to her dance partner, she conceded to his skills as she said, "You lead." Smiling, he simply nodded as he again took her in his arms, leading her back onto the dance floor, where they glided across, not crashing into anyone or anything for the rest of the dance. When the song ended, she curtsied, thanking him for his expert leading skills. He bowed, saying, though she knew it wasn't true, "You were an excellent partner." Having seen her move more gracefully since the last time, some of the men from before approached, asking her to dance with them as they stepped between her and Joshua. "Sorry, I don't..." Looking past the group of men, she spotted the young man taking notice of one of the ladies standing along the sidelines, looking forlorn about not being invited onto the floor. With a kind smile he approached her, making a motion with his hand, as if asking her to dance. The look on her face made Mira feel offended for the young man, as the woman looked disgusted by the fact that Joshua was standing within a foot of her. Hurrying to his side, Mira told the woman, "If you aren't that good of a dancer, he is an excellent partner." Before she could continue, the woman replied in a haughty manner, "As if I need help dancing. And even if I did, I wouldn't learn it from a servant." Raising her nose in a snub manner, the woman turned away, leaving Joshua and Mira alone to stare after her. Feeling slighted on the man's behalf, she turned to see his eyes gazing after the woman, with a look of sadness, as if his best friend had told him they didn't want to be his friend anymore. "Joshua, He turned to her again, his smile returning, as her heart warmed at the sight. "The next song is about to start. Shouldn't you be choosing a partner?" He pointed back to the men who were still watching her with eager looks. She turned away with disgust as she shook her head. "No, they're not the kind of guy I like to dance with." There was a twinkle in his eye as he asked, as if he didn't know the answer, "And what type do you like to dance with?" "The kind that smells like grapes and manure." Looking self-conscious, he smelled himself as he asked, "Do I really?" She laughed as she took a hold of his arm and pulled him onto the dance floor. "Don't worry, we'll air you out on the floor." Though there were other people around them, Mira did not notice any of them, as she spent the rest of the ball held in Joshua's arm, where she talked with him more of her hopes, dreams, and life back on the farm. A life she, at that moment, did not miss at all. Chapter 11. After the dance, Joshua had to part ways with her, as he had other duties to attend to. "But you should explore the castle." "Are you sure that's allowed?" He had the usual twinkle in his eyes as he assured her, "It's fine." Taking his advice, she took her break before the next activity to walk the halls of the castle. As she did, she was confused by the things she heard. Passing a group of kitchen staff, she heard them pondering over the candidates for the bride. "Which one do you think the prince will choose?" "That Lois is very lovely, and she's so nice. I think she'd be a perfect match for our prince." Mira was sure she'd heard that name before, but didn't have time to think about it as the third servant said, "I just hope whoever he chooses will love him as much as he'll love them." The other two nodded as if they agreed with the sentiment. "Excuse me," stepping up to the staff, she asked, "Could you tell me about the prince?" The thought of speaking about their ruler seemed to delight the staff, as they all beamed with pleasure. "He's the most benevolent ruler. He never has a mean word to say about anyone." "If I could, I would marry him," admitted an elderly female chef, to which the other two laughed. Thanking them for their comments, she continued on her way, not understanding anything of what she had heard. He must have paid them to say those things, or threatened them. There's no way the prince is any of those things. Around a corner, she almost collided with a small body, as it chided her, "Watch where you're going!" Looking down, she smiled as she spotted the small table server with the big blue eyes. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" The girl seemed to recognize her as well, as she curtsied quickly. "I'm just playing hide-and-seek with some of the younger kids." The statement perplexed Mira as she looked at the girl. The only thing she could see as being younger than the girl would have been babies. There are other children around? Tons of them. The thought made Mira sick, as she remembered what she'd heard of the prince's treatment of children. "Are you sure you should be playing and not working?" "Candace said I could take a break. Did you want to play?" Before she could say anything, the girl had grabbed her hand and quickly explained the rules, as she then sent her off to hide. "And pick a good spot. I don't want this to be too easy." As the girl called for her to hurry, Mira found herself running as she made her way through the castle's halls. Things started to blur together, as before she knew it she was in a section of the castle she didn't recognize. Hoping to find her bearings, she opened a door, which led into a large study, with large bookshelves making up the walls of the room. In the middle of the room, the focal point seemed to be a large writing desk, which was piled high with papers. Stepping over to the desk, she looked at the sheets, not stopping to think for a moment that a lady would never read someone else's work. "Dear Rhoda, I'm sorry to hear about your father. Not everyone will believe the message that I am coming, and will even grow violent towards those who do. It pains me to think of all the families that will be torn apart, but I promise you will find a new family with us here and—" Mira skimmed down to the bottom of the letter, where she saw the signature to be from Prince Mikhail. The other papers were signed similarly, and all seemed to be addressed to people in Beth-Natash, some having names, while others were just generalized to a city or town. Hearing the sound, she turned to see the small girl struggling with a large door as she made her way into the room. "Hey, I told you not to make it easy for me." Holding up the letter, she inquired what it was. "Those are letters the prince writes to citizens of Beth-Natash." "Why? How else would he talk with them? But why does he care to talk with them?" "Why wouldn't he? They are his people." Mira shook her head adamantly as she said, "They are Prince Jair's. He's the one that takes care of us and owns the property to our nation." The girl snorted, as if she found Mira's words laughable. "As if! He just stole the deed from the guy that the king originally gave the land to. But Prince Mikhail got the deed back a few years ago, and is the rightful owner." "That's not true." "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, you obviously don't know the right story, so here, sit down and I'll tell you." Sounding like an old-school marm about to give a lecture, Mira found herself doing what the girl said as she gave her a stern look. "Long ago, the king adopted all the surrounding nations and people as his own. Prince Jair was among those adopted, and he was given a special place in the kingdom, working right alongside the king and the prince. But soon, Jair got jealous of Prince Mikhail and wanted his position for himself. So, plotting a rebellion, he got some of the citizens together and tried to form a coup, but the king caught wind of the attack and overthrew the rebels. They tried to talk reason to Jair, hoping he'd give up his thirst for more power, but he wouldn't, so because the king still loved him, he sent him away. That's when Jair snuck into Beth-Natash, a wasteland the king had just recently inhabited, and stole the deed from the man who was supposed to rule it. Bethentage isn't really Prince Jair's? The girl shook her head. No, but in order for Prince Mikhail to get it back and save the people from Jair's rule, he had to get the deed. That's why he snuck in 5 years ago and took it back. But Jair claimed he still had rule over the land, since the people chose him as ruler. He said that in order for the prince to have true rule over the land, he had to get the support of the people. That's why Mikhail is doing this marriage thing, in hopes that by convincing one resident of Bethentage that he is their true ruler, and the one who actually does care about them, the others will see the truth. As the girl finished her story, Mira gazed at her with pity. To think they had filled her head with such lies. The prince's cruelty truly had no limits. Later, as Mira talked with Joshua, she found that the lies told about the prince had even convinced his generation when he told her, "The king and prince have done everything in their power in order to regain Bethentage. That's why the prince snuck in 2,000 days ago, in order to get back the deed that had been stolen. He risked his life in order that you and your people might be free." "You're referring to that time 5 years ago when those lives were lost? That was a terrible time." She remembered how she had felt at the news of her father's death. "I should have known the prince had something to do with it." "It's not like that," he tried to assure her. "In all that time since he got back the deed, the prince has been working to get the people ready. That's why he's written those letters each and every day." "But that was 5 years ago. Does he really think after all this time that's passed, people are going to change their minds about him? Even if he has to wait 2,000 more days, he will not give up. Why do you keep saying it like that?" "Because ever since the day he returned from the battle, he's been counting each day, waiting for the time when he can return and claim his people." The thought made her snort in disbelief, as she thought instead of all the cruelty he was probably wishing to convey on those who had not conceded to his rule. "Why do you think the prince is cruel?" "Because I know he is. Everyone does. If you listen to the other ladies talk, you'll see that I'm not the only one that believes this. And if you had ever visited Bethentage, you would see." "But why? Why do you think he's cruel?" "Besides what I've heard, from what I've seen here at the castle, he has so many rules. How can anyone keep them all?" "When you love someone, you don't even notice when they ask you to do something. It's not a rule or a burden to you. You just do it because you love them. The prince's rules aren't set up to hurt you or make you feel confined. They are to help you be better, happier people." "I don't see how." "You will once you realize how much the prince loves you. His love will change you." Mira folded her arms as she stubbornly stated, "I doubt that. When a person is worth changing for, you won't even notice that you are changing. But it will happen. Love changes people." Though she wanted to argue with him, she could tell that he was not going to be convinced by anything she'd say. They brainwashed him too. Thinking of something else the little girl had told her, she asked him about the letters she had found. She said that the prince left some letters for the people while he was taking back the deed, and that he sent out letters to every citizen. But I've never received one. Prince Jair has been working to intercept the letters, so a lot of them don't get through. But there are people on the inside who have delivered some to people. They have copied down the letters and distributed them to others. But why does he send them? He knows that Jair is telling lies about him and the king, and he hopes through his letters he can show people that he does care. Some even write back to him, and he sends them personal letters. But most time he generalizes his notes. But he fills them all with his love, so that people will feel as if the letters were written with them specifically in mind, and will encourage them. Encourage them of what? That things will get better. The Jair won't always be in control, and someday the prince will come to take back the land and the people who call him master. Mira frowned as she thought about ever calling Mikhail master. It sickened her, and she had to excuse herself as she left to get some air. No matter what happened, she would never bow to Mikhail as ruler, not even if he held a knife to her throat. Chapter 12. The next day, the two groups of women were combined and given a chance before the next event to get better acquainted. While the groups of ladies chatted, Isabel approached Mira with a scowl. "I don't like her." Mira looked at the other woman with a confused expression. "Who?" Isabel motioned with her chin to a group of women. She was about to ask of which woman Isabel was referring, when someone stepped aside, and she saw who her friend must have been talking about. The woman in the center was flawless, from her porcelain skin to her long locks of perfectly styled chestnut hair. When she smiled, the whole room seemed to light up with the brightness of her expression, and her eyes shimmered with the look of someone who would never hurt anyone for any reason. Noticing Mira staring, The girl separated from her adoring throng and came toward them. Before she reached them, Isabel made a snorting sound and turned away. "Hello, darling," greeted the girl as she took Mira's hands. The girl's hands were soft and made Mira feel as if her own hands must have felt like rough rocks in comparison. "My name is Lois. What is yours?" Even her voice was lovely. Mira for a moment considered faking that her voice was gone, so as not to have to befoul the air with the sound of her voice. "I'm Mira." "What a lovely name." She guessed Lois didn't know what her name meant, or if she did, she was just being polite. No one had ever said her name was anything other than suitable for your character. Still holding on to her hands, Lois said with assurance, "We're going to be the best of friends." After she had gone, Isabel returned, having remained close enough to hear the exchange as she said, "I bet she says that to all the girls." "She seems nice." "You've obviously never met her type. Trust me, I've been out in society. I know what her true colors are." Isabel's eyes followed Lois with suspicion, as the woman made her way around the room, making each person feel as if they were the only one in the world she cared about. And the fact that I've never heard anything about her up to this point makes me even sure she's more than what she lets on. When the women had all exchanged pleasantries, Nehemiah came into the room to tell them about their next task. "The prince spends much of his time out helping the people of his land. He hopes his bride will have a love for the people as well, and be willing to help them with whatever tasks they have. Today, we will be going to a local farm to help them with planting and various other chores." The mention of planting reminded Mira of her own farm. She hoped whoever Prince Jer had sent to take care of the seeding for her was doing a decent job. After the woman had changed into work attire, something which the prince provided, they were taken out together in a score of carriages to the local farm. The air was cool, and many women complained about having to be out in such chilly weather, which Mira thought was perfect weather for hard labor. Once they started sweating, the coolness would be a relief. When they arrived at the farm, more complaints sounded, as they smelled the scent of manure, combined with other farm smells the girls were obviously not used to. Honestly, Mira found it to be a more pleasant farm smell, as far as farm smells went. The farm itself was much larger than Mira's, and had a large barn located near the field, from which the farmer pulled out a pair of oxen. "Who wants to work with old Bertha and Betsy?" When everyone else looked away with disgust, Mira raised her hand. While the rest of the girls got to work tilling the land with hoes, Mira worked with the team of oxen, digging up the field so that those following along behind her could plant seeds. The work was hard, but Mira found herself having fun, as she next helped a group of teen boys dig up a stump in the field. With a mighty tug, they freed the stump, which got her a round of applause from the boys. "Ah, shucks, this ain't nothing. You should have seen the one me and my dad removed 6 summers ago. That thing was almost as big as a house." "You must be pretty strong, then," stated one boy. "Adam here's our strongest guy. You think you could beat him in an arm wrestling match?" Seeing the boy they were referring to, who looked almost as big as the ox, she shook her head. "Sorry, boys. I retired from arm wrestling a long time ago, but thanks." At another stump, Mira spotted Lois struggling to help another group of young farmers get it free. After pulling especially hard, she stumbled back and fell down with exhaustion. Immediately, a group of men hurried over, one part helping her up, as another part worked with the youth to get the stump out of the ground. "I'm so sorry, darlings," stated the woman, as the men escorted her to a tree to catch her breath in the shade. "I'm not used to such hard labor. I wish I were as strong and robust as some of the women here." She smiled in Mira's direction, making her blush with the compliment. Nearby, Rachel collapsed to the ground as she lamented the fact that she just can't go on. Her cries of exhaustion weren't met with the same kind of regards as Lois received, since it was apparent she was just being dramatic. When she realized no one was paying her any attention, she rose to her feet and huffed away. The next time Mira saw Lois, she was helping by passing out water to all the workers. To her side she heard a grunt and turned to see Isabel glaring at the woman. "I see she's doing as little work as possible." Her friend didn't even seem to notice Rachel, who was sitting on a stump nearby, from which she hadn't moved. "Not everyone is as suited to hard labor as others," stated Mira in Lois's defense. Isabel gave her a curious look, but did not say anything while she headed away. Later, Mira joined her friend inside the barn, where the woman worked with another group of women cleaning out the barn stalls. Isabel looked disgusted, as she held her nose with one hand, while shoveling the straw with her other hand. Her cart was barely full, as she ended up dropping most of the contents of her shovel back onto the floor, as her arm was too weak to lift it up all the way. "You really need both hands," advised Mira. "Here." Taking a handkerchief, she folded it over itself, then tied it around Isabel's face. "That should help some with the smell." How do you know how to do all of this? Mira turned to the questioner. It was Elizabeth, and she was wearing the expression she always had when she thought she was catching a whiff of gossip in the air. Suddenly, she could hear her mother's voice admonishing her for giving away her humbler background.
Why couldn't you have faked a sprained ankle and gotten out of heavy labor, or volunteered for water duty? Why did I have to birth an ox?
Before she could reply to Elizabeth's question, Isabel broke in for her, saying, Her father owns a lot of farmland, and she's seen how the workers do things. The answer seemed to satisfy the other woman as she went back to her duties. Turning to her friend, Mira asked, You know where I really come from, don't you? Like I told you, I've traveled around Beth Natasha a lot. I know a southern accent when I hear one, and you don't exactly have the hands of a lady of leisure. My background doesn't bother you? Isabel made a snorting sound as she waved off the question. As if I'd care where you come from. Most of my best friends have been ones high society would never even glance at. I don't care if you were a farmhand back home or a lady of the night. She winked at Mira, which made her feel a tinge of regret at ever having wanted to distance herself from the woman. At least she wasn't the type to cast someone off just because of where they were born. After the farm was cleaned, the farmers provided them with a meal, which the ladies greedily consumed. As Mira turned to thank the person serving her a second helping, she was surprised to see Lois holding the ladle. Noting her surprised expression, the woman smiled at her brightly as she explained, I'm not used to such hard labor, but I offered to help where I could. Tasting the offered food, Mira was amazed by how delicious it tasted. Oh, thank you, replied Lois, as Mira told her how good it was. I know I don't have as many skills as some of the ladies here, but I hope the prince will at least see that I do my best with the ones I have. I'm sure he will. While they ate, some of the women asked the farmers if the prince really came out to help them, to which they replied, Of course, he's one of the hardest workers. As they talked about all the things he did for them, Mira saw the same look she had seen in the servants' eyes when they talked about the man, a look of complete and utter devotion. Though they seemed sincere, she could tell the women did not believe the workers' stories, as they looked skeptically back at each other. The prince must have threatened them, stated one woman to another, reminding Mira of her own thoughts. Or bribed them, added another. Back outside, Mira spotted Joshua, who had arrived to help them in their work. She waved to him, but he was distracted by a group of children who had gathered around him and were happily chattering away all at once. A moment later she spotted him helping a group of men rebuild a section of the barn, which had been damaged by a recent storm. Every time she caught sight of him he was working on some new task, providing a helping hand wherever was needed, no matter how hard or dirty the task was. In comparison, most of the prospective brides seemed keener on using every excuse they could come up with to get out of the work, no matter how easy or clean. Rachel especially was skilled at getting out of the offered jobs. When asked to gather eggs, she lamentably replied, I'm allergic to chickens. At the offer of following behind the plow to sow seeds, she said, My doctor says I have weak wrists and shouldn't be making sweeping motions. Near her, Mira found Elizabeth, who was whispering with whomever would listen about all the juicy gossip she had found out about each of the women. Did you know Mira's father owns a farm? Apparently she watches the servants work for fun. Who does that? Thinking the rumor was the least of her worries, she left the story alone as she headed to help a group of men lift one of the sides of the barn. By the end of the day, she had not had a single chance to speak with Joshua. Though she knew they had both been busy, she found herself disappointed by the zero time they'd spent together. Even as the ladies were loaded onto the cart, she found herself wishing for an opportunity to talk with the man. But as the carriages rode off, she knew she would not get a chance that day. Inside the carriage, she listened as the women riding with her began to complain about the day's activity. If that's the kind of thing the prince does, I don't think I want to be his bride. Do you actually think he does it on a regular basis? Why would Prince even get within a foot of manure? What do you think? Inquired one of the women of Mira. Do you think royalty should be demeaning themselves to such tasks? I don't know. I think for a ruler to really be able to lead, he must sometimes do less pleasant tasks in order to show his people how to live. The woman looked at her skeptically. Not sure what the right response should be, she inquired of her friend, who had joined her in the carriage. What do you think, Isabel? Turning, she found her to have already fallen asleep, her body being tossed along by the carriage, as it soon knocked her to the side so that she slid over, coming to rest on Mira's shoulder. Changing their subject as the women noticed Isabel's closeness to the other girl, they inquired of Mira, Are you two friends? Before she could reply either way, the women continued, I would distance myself from her if I were you. She's not exactly the best company to have. I heard her family made their money through merchant endeavors, and we all know what that means. Mira did not, but did not have to ask as the other woman said,
"They're basically just a group of well-dressed vagabonds moving from city to sell their wares. I don't even think any of them have a brick-and-mortar home. I heard they live in their wagons."
Ignoring their talk, Mira looked out the windows at the sun as it set over the land. The large orb looked like a pool of yellow as it shimmered in its own setting light. Back on the farm she had often stopped her work to watch the sun's final beams as they disappeared below the horizon, but it had never looked as beautiful as it did here. She was just thinking about how much more beautiful the sky's colors were than any of the women's dresses when something hit against the window, startling her. The other woman looked just as startled as the carriage suddenly came to a stop.
"Are we being robbed? I don't want to die, I'm too beautiful."
The carriage door opened then, and before Mira could tackle the intruder to the ground, she was greeted with the sparkling eyes of Joshua. "I hope I didn't startle you, ladies." The women looked affronted by his entrance, but did not say anything as Mira asked him what he was doing. "I've been asking at each of the carriages if anyone is feeling the effects of heat stroke. Rachel was complaining of feeling chills earlier, and I want to make sure no one becomes sick. We're still a ways off from the castle, so if you're feeling nauseous or dehydrated, there is a well right along the road here to drink from."
"I just want to get home,"
stated one of the women, looking perturbed at his intrusion. Before the other woman could tell him to get on his way, Isabel came awake as she asked what was going on. Spotting Joshua, she smiled as she asked him what he was doing there. He gave her the answer he had given Mira. "Oh, I'm so thirsty, I could drink the whole Bethentash Sea." Though she'd been asleep just a moment ago, she looked wide awake as Joshua helped her out of the carriage and over to the well that was situated along the road. As the man started to pull up the bucket for her, she turned back to the carriage as she called to the driver, "You go on ahead. Josh will give me a ride back." Without waiting to see if Joshua had agreed with the idea, the carriage started on, leaving the two behind.
"Of course she'd jump at a chance to spend time alone with him," scoffed one of the girls. "I wonder if the prince knows what kind of girl she is." The woman seemed to be insinuating something about her friend she did not like, as Mira told them, "Don't talk about Isabel that way. You don't even know her."
"Oh, we don't have to know her. We've seen her type. If the prince chooses her, he's going to end up like the man in the Forsaken Queen. I bet that's the only reason that stable boy came to our carriage. He must have heard from the other servants about her and was eager to have his own adventure." Knowing exactly what they were insinuating now, Mira told them in not-so-subtle terms to shut their mouths, throwing in a few choice words before stating, "Joshua is not like that, and Isabel will never try anything with him." "Why? Because you two are friends and she knows you like him?" The women were sneering now, making Mira feel like a pitied idiot. "Get real. Women like her don't care who their friends are. A conquest is a conquest, no matter whose man it may or may not have been." "But I'm sure if you really like the stable boy, Isabel would be willing to share. Her kind are very generous." "Especially with their venereal diseases." Her mother had warned her. She had told her over and over that she was a lady and was never to act in a way contrary to her birth. But as her feelings of anger rose up in her chest at the things they were insinuating about her friends, Mira lost all sense of reason and deportment as she leapt across the carriage at the women, who cried out in alarm. As the carriage continued along, it was jostled more by its contents than the road, as the women tried to escape from Mira as she pulled at their hair and clothes. "You take that back!" "Never!" shrieked one woman, who screamed even louder as Mira wrenched back her hair. The night air was filled with the sound of select words, along with grunts and more curses, as the fight continued till the three women spilled out of the carriage on arriving at the castle. "You are a monster!" growled one of the women, as the man who had opened their door helped her up. "We'll tell the prince about this. You're not going to get a step further. And neither is that friend of yours." Mira lunged at the woman, but the driver held her back as she snapped, "If you care anything about keeping all your teeth, I suggest you leave Isabel out of this." With a panicked yelp, the women hurried away from her as they took refuge in the castle. As she watched them scurry away, she wished she were back on the farm in her simple life, without the cares of high society and the judgmental glances. At least there, the only person critiquing her every move was her mother. "Calm down, miss," advised one of the servants, as the driver set her back on the ground. Straightening her dress, she cast each of them a "don't mess with me" look, then headed inside. She had had enough of people for the night.